Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're embarking on a journey to uncover a truly staggering historical truth, how monumental imperial power was built entirely outside the traditional Western model. You see, between the years 1200 and 1450, Sub-Saharan Africa was an extraordinarily diverse place, just packed with different ecological zones and ethnic groups. And out of this incredible diversity rose one of the wealthiest, most structurally brilliant, and frankly, captivating empires in global history. We're talking about the mighty Mali Empire.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is the structural roadmap we'll use to build this empire from the ground up. 1. Kinship and political power. 2. The gold and salt trade. 3. Mansa Musa's global stage. 4. Timbuktu as a center of learning. And 5. Ibn Battuta's outside perspective.
Let's jump right into Section 1, Kinship and Political Power. Before we get into the mountains of gold and those towering mud brick mosques, we really have to understand how power actually worked here. Think about the sharp contrast between these two systems. Over in Eurasia, states relied heavily on drawing rigid territorial boundaries and writing out strict law codes. But sub-Saharan kinship states operated completely differently. Power wasn't about drawing lines in the sand. Instead, it was structured around lineages, oral traditions, and respected elders who served as vital intermediaries with ancestral spirits. In early Mali, your kinship network determined your access to land, who your allies were, and your social obligations.
So how exactly do you scale up from a local family lineage to a massive, sprawling empire? Well, it follows a pretty clear progression. The absolute basic unit of power is the lineage group. When a powerful lineage accumulates enough followers, military strength, or trade wealth, they naturally scale up into chiefdoms and kingdoms. Eventually, that momentum leads to imperial unification. For Mali, this monumental shift happened around 1235 when the legendary founder Sundiata Keita unified the Mande-speaking peoples and defeated his rivals at the epic Battle of Karina.
So the crucial point is this. How did a society without written laws preserve its foundational narratives, like the epic story of Sundiata's victory? Well, they relied on the griot. Think of a griot as a walking, breathing national archive and diplomatic envoy all rolled into one. They were professional oral historians, musicians, and keepers of political knowledge. They literally committed entire complex histories and genealogies to memory. This incredible system ensured the empire's legacy survived for centuries through the spoken word, long before ever touching a single piece of paper.
Moving on to Section 2, the gold and salt trade.
Now you might be wondering, how did the Mali Empire fund its massive power without the heavy agricultural tax base used by Eurasian states? Well, they had absolute geographic genius on their side. Consider these two completely complementary resource zones. Down in the forest regions to the south, you have an absolute abundance of gold. Then, up in the desert regions to the north, you have vast mines producing salt, which, remember, was equally essential for human survival and food preservation. Mali sat perfectly right in the middle of these two very different, very valuable worlds.
And this brilliantly illustrates how Mali positioned itself as the ultimate medieval toll booth. Step 1. Gold flows north from the forest. Step 2. Salt flows south from the desert. Step 3. Mali, because it controlled the vital Niger River corridor, taxes the exchange of goods at every single junction. They basically became the absolute linchpin of the trans-Saharan trade network. It's this continuous gold and salt exchange that truly funded their armies, supported their scholars, and built their imperial power.
Let's turn to Section 3, Mansa Musa's global stage.
Take a moment to really absorb this number, 60,000. In 1324, the empire's most internationally celebrated ruler, Mansa Musa, embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca with an entourage the size of a modern small city. Can you even imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of moving 60,000 people across the Sahara Desert? Even if historical sources exaggerate slightly, it gives us an undeniable picture of the immense scale of his wealth, his power, and his unbelievable logistical capability.
And this spectacular public display had monumental impacts. Mansa Musa distributed so much gold along his route through Cairo and the Hijaz that he literally crashed the gold market in the Middle East for over a decade. But here's the thing. He didn't just spend his wealth, he invested it. He brought back renowned Islamic scholars and the famous architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili to Mali. This effectively announced Mali's full integration into the broader Islamic world. It famously earned Mansa Musa a spot on the 1375 Catalan Atlas in Europe, where he's depicted holding a massive gold nugget.
Now for Section 4, Timbuktu as a center of learning. Moving away from the economic spectacle of gold and salt, we arrive at the intellectual crown of the empire, situated right at the edge of the Sahara. You see, Timbuktu wasn't just a place to trade physical goods. The Senghor Mosque and Madrasa transformed the city into a bustling university that drew scholars from across the entire Islamic world. It was a major intellectual hub where ideas, philosophies, and discoveries were exchanged just as freely as currency.
The scholarship produced here was incredibly advanced. Students and masters were deeply studying Islamic law, astronomy, medicine, and history. Crucially, this knowledge was preserved in hundreds of thousands of Arabic manuscripts, many of which survive to this day. And this matters immensely because these surviving texts directly and powerfully shatter the outdated colonial myth that Africa somehow lacked a literate, scholarly tradition. West Africa absolutely had a rich, thriving, and highly intellectual written culture.
Finally, Section 5, Ibn Battuta's Outside Perspective.
Okay, time to put on our historical detective hats. We're going to examine our richest external, primary source account of the Mali court, written by the famous Moroccan scholar and traveler Ibn Battuta, who visited back in 1352. He highly praised their strict justice system and their deep devotion to Islamic prayer, noting there was, quote, complete security in their country. However, nobody likes a bad host. He also famously criticized the ruler at the time, Mansa Suleiman, calling him a miserly king who skimped on the lavish welcome gifts.
So this brings up a fascinating question for us as modern readers. How does Ibn Battuta's own perspective shape what he noticed about Mali? Whenever we read a primary source, especially from a traveler, we really have to pause and actively think critically about the author's own cultural positioning and personal expectations.
Let's move to the breakdown and see how this builds, because we can never take primary sources purely at face value. First, consider the historical context. Ibn Battuta arrived decades after the lavish peak of Mansa Musa's reign, which might actually explain his severe disappointment with the current king's gifts. Then look at his intended audience. He was compiling this travelogue for North African Islamic readers, so he naturally highlighted Mali's Islamic devotion. And finally, his point of view. As a Moroccan Arab scholar, his observations inherently reflect the biases and assumptions of his own distinct cultural background.
Which leaves us with this final, profound question to wrap up our explainer today. If our historical memory relies on the inherent biases of foreign travelers on one hand, and the incredibly complex, uniquely structured spoken words of griots on the other, how many other complex empires are we still completely misunderstanding today? It's a powerful reminder to always challenge our historical assumptions, look closely at the brilliant structural foundations of societies like Mali, and never stop digging deeper into the past. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep that curiosity alive.